All right, well, here we go.
Okay.
What I'm going to do, since I have such a large crowd, is I'm going to read and talk for a little while, and then we're going to kind of talk about this book and whatever we want to talk about. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Anyway, when I've done a lot of these readings in previous novels, and sometimes when you read for too long, you lose people. You know, the reader goes on and on and on, and pretty soon it's like, it's better to read short and then to have somebody get engaged with what's being read, or with me, or whatever I say. So anyway, this is about specifically my new novel, which is called Harry. Catch the cover. It's quite a cover, I think, for those who like visuals. And this is my first presentation about Harry. I have two more this week, one in Enfield and one in South Hadley. And I'm really pleased to promote this book, which took a while to compose. And what I'm going to do is read to you some of the beginning, and then maybe some little excerpts later on, and then we can have a talk. So this is called Revisiting, June 2011. Harry and Carolyn had now been together for nearly 40 years as marrieds. He thought it likely and logical that their union had endured, and she could only attribute the relationship's survival to fate. They did agree that their daughters provided both impetus and glue when the personal fabric occasionally frayed. Marissa and Diana were paramount in their minds. They adored the kids whom they wished would provide grandchildren. Marissa lived nearby in Brooklyn, while Diana was in Moab, Utah. Harry and Carolyn had long ago journeyed to that southwestern town and wound up getting married there. Reflecting on their union, Carolyn concluded that near breaks occurred all too often, while Harry, even now, minimized each fracture. Hey, Stefan.
Hi, Fawn. Linda, hi. Linda's on her way.
Okay. Well, maybe we should...
Can't say anything important now.
No, I'm just reading the beginning, then I'm going to... It was time to re-experience the nuclear unit with their girls. It had been 4 decades since Harry and Carolyn had temporarily fled their Houston Street apartment in Manhattan for a week to hike among the red rocks of the Southwest. Now, flying the skies to Moab, Utah, the two thought back to that time. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a little drink. So that's kind of a little bit of a preface to all that goes on. And then part 1 of the book begins with chapter 1 in New York, the summer of 1970. Heat blasted Harry from above and below as he emerged from the subway, walked toward East Houston Street. He could not find number 24, and he was in a panic. Wearing a striped shirt and shorts, his hair held in place by a bandana, Harry's pores could not hold that much water. He knew that he smelled. On this, the first morning of his stint as a census taker, amid a heat wave, he would stink up the place. What place? Where was the building? They told him it was in a tenement. Big help. All of these apartment structures, some without visible numbers, left him guessing as to the location. Frustrated and sweating profusely, Harry sat down on the sidewalk. Harry had grown up in the suburbs, a bridge and tunnel boy. Harry was in awe of Manhattan. While he pretended to understand street grids, he was oftentimes confused. He looked up at the concrete and brick structures and he sighed. A girl with frizzy red hair who was jogging with her dog called out, "Hey, what's up? You okay?" As she paused, the dog licked Harry's face. I just can't find number 24, said Harry. It's back a block, indented, you know? Like in the English class, set back, see? She pointed as Harry stood, peered, and noticed that the projection of buildings was standing forward as if a complete row was permanently altered. That's it, that's the one you want, see? See you, the girl said, and she moved on. He turned, but it seemed like everyone was heading toward him. It added up to Harry versus a stampede of New Yorkers, eager to get through the first weekend of July into their customary and preferred style of life. It wasn't supposed to be a solo gig. Sandy had the notion that he and Harry could grab census jobs, earn some good money, spend some time together once again. As very best friends in college, each had gone off on their own after graduation. The plan was that they would now assume as what they considered themselves to be brothers. Harry had signed on and Sandy died. Kaput. Harry did not easily survive the knockout blow. He was thinking of Sandy as he battled through throngs of early morning workers. The girl with a captivating swatch of bright red hair had vanished in the opposite direction. Harry muttered to himself. If he and Carolyn had not decided to take the summer off, maybe he wouldn't be pushing through the crowd, searching for a building that may not even exist. He told Carolyn he was fine with a short separation, but he desperately missed her. He used a rolled-up issue of the Saturday Review to forge his way. It had two articles he kept reading over and over. The one Irving Howe wrote, which pissed him off so, and about how the New Left was not quite what he thought, and the measured piece about Bob Dylan. He had memorized the title, Poetry of Salvation. So that's the very beginning of the first chapter. We have this young guy with very long hair. It's all kind of banded together and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to read to you mostly from the beginning portions of the book because I don't want to do a kind of spoiler thing for you if you do get this book. So I'm going to read various bits and pieces from the beginning. So Harry, we're jumping ahead a little bit. He was wondering if his trio of friends would support this crazy idea of marrying Carolyn. What happened was that, I'm going to give you a little bit of the plot here. He did wander around in this building and suddenly some people took him in and they became his friends. And this references to those friends. As he tried to sort it out, Carolyn suggested it might be easier to live together. A tryout, she said, so that we can avoid the marriage thing, forever thing, maybe for a little while. You're the one who always says that contracts are just pieces of paper. Feeling bombarded and confused, Harry told Carolyn that the friend he was staying with had mentioned that there was a vacant apartment upstairs. I have no idea what it looks like. I can have this couch corner, but after 4 or 5 days, that would get old and I'd have to contribute and I don't have a job. See, what's going on here is Harry's gone up to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Carolyn is based. And they're trying to figure out how to make this thing work. A week later, Carolyn and Harry sat at either end of a big room. He tried to stabilize a small rickety bookshelf, and she pulled a bedspread embossed with multicolored flowers over a worn and weary sofa. Each of them was nevertheless smiling. Okay. And now this is back on the Lower East Side, which is where I first read from. He discovered one guy named Edison, who is a really important kind of supportive character, your best supportive character in a novel type of an individual if we were giving out awards to my book. Anyway, he's an eccentric guy. Anyway, so Edison had opened all the windows, allowing for a breeze, and now he sat at the piano to explain that his piece was in progress. And he motioned Harry and Carolyn to stand on either side of him and face Rosie and Lola, also neighbors in the building. They were seated on a tattered dark red Persian rug. He played an introduction, raised his left hand toward the performers, and he said, together they all sang lines from People Will Say We're in Love. You know the show tune. Silence, and then Rosie simply said, oh my. Lola chimed in, way too much romance for the morning. It almost makes me dizzy. But I needed a good reason to swoon, to laugh, you know. Carolyn claimed Harry had dragged her to Washington Square Park. But he interrupted and said, hardly dragging. I just thought it would be kind of cool to practice the song there. You never know what exactly is going to happen, who will show up. You could get hit by a flying frisbee while you're dancing. Maybe just hang out and watch guys playing chess all day. Sort of worked out to be there. Rosie talked about the rare occasions, mostly on Sundays, when she and Richard, her husband, were on the same schedule. They would take the kids just so that they could look at people. We tell them it's not polite to stare. Yeah, I mean, they're boys who are 6 and 8.5. They might fight with each other, but when they're out in the world together, they form this wall. Don't mess with them. That's when they really stick together, stand up for the other one. Otherwise, not so much. I saw Allen Ginsberg there when he was leading a snake dance with the accordion guy, Lola said. Allen and Peter. Definitely a cross between meditation and a story. Okay, very beginning portion. Jump to more of Edison. Edison held his focus on music. Turn, 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 like the way the Byrds recorded it. The exquisite blend of your voices will be sensational. There might even be room enough for me to sing into that one. As he spoke, Edison played an introduction, while Harry and Carolyn stepped up to sing together the lyrics about laughing and weeping and healing. They were interrupted by rapid knocks on Edison's front door and a quick entrance by Rosie and Lola, who explained the walls remained thin. Rosie added they could always hear Edison playing. She carried a plate filled with chocolate chip cookies. Saying he needed to eat, Edison grabbed them and Lola playfully poked his little belly. Rosie said she thought they sounded different from the Byrds, but just as good. Harry explained his parents' love for Pete Seeger. He had first heard the song on one of their records. Carolyn admitted to having a crush on Roger McGuinn, the Byrds' vocalist. She turned to Harry to assure him that McGuinn wasn't a threat. And then Edison led into Paul McCartney's Yesterday. Sublime, said Edison. Can you play the guitar? Asked Carolyn, who took one of Edison's guitars as Lola asked her to hold hands with Harry. Lola wanted to gauge a picture and added photography was her hobby. She urged them to lean into one another, not be shy. You do that, Lo. I want the girl's voice. I just get excited when someone is on pitch that way. Sorry. And now, a jump forward. Harry and Carolyn had 2 daughters named Marissa and Diana. And I need to have a little bit of them in this preliminary reading so you get acquainted with them, or at least one of them. So this is Marissa, and she's with her boyfriend Grant, and they have a great relationship. And here we have a jump. They were in Moab, but the 2 of them agreed on the impulse, get out of town. 22 hours later, they were in Taos, searching for food. What do you suggest? Asked Grant, eyeing the Orlando's waitress who wore a revealing shirt, one with ends she had tied together at her waist. Marissa studied Grant. Shrimp enchiladas are the best, the waitress said. Hot, if you know what I mean. She squirmed and she fiddled with her outfit. Grant reddened while Marissa stood. I need a minute, she said, and she walked away. The waitress, now tucking at both ends of her top, stood in front of Grant, who tried to look away. She turned sideways and raised her upper body. Look, I don't know what you're thinking, but obviously, and he gestured over his shoulder toward Marissa, I'm not in any position, I don't want to either. The waitress smiled and walked away as Marissa returned. I saw the way you were looking at her. If I were a guy, I'd do the same, she said. Sorry, she practically shoved her chest in my face, he said. Marissa laughed. Why should she care so soon about this new man? But she discovered more than once that what she was feeling wasn't an intellectual choice. If she wanted a guy, she would be jealous every time he even glanced at someone else. No disclaimers worked. I feel secure about what I have, she said. You should, and I'm sorry about that, Grant replied. Just a few more and then we can have our conversation. This is in Sheffield, Massachusetts, and we're in mid-July 2010. So we've gone from 1977 to 1970 rather, to mid-July 2010. Marissa was afraid to ask him if it was the sex. Why else, soon after they'd come together, would he follow her to this town where she was scheduled to do a theater workshop? What more could be in it for him? They had managed to survive on savings and occasional part-time jobs. Marissa chose not to do the play in Alphabet City. Working for real money should be top priority. It was 5 a.m. and they arrived the previous day, found the B&B, settled in, and here she was pondering. So Marissa has always been a wannabe actress. And now she's up in the Berkshires, where she's possibly going to get a summer gig, which it turns out you'll have to read about to find out about the success or the lack of with that. And right now, we moved to Provincetown, Massachusetts, late August 2010. The Berkshire experience was sensational for the acting troupe, and Grant was immense for putting up with it, but now she wanted quiet and him. The view from the tiny rental, which they called Shack, showed Commercial Street and the Bay beyond, the west side of town between the tourist trap and further up, North Truro. Inside, she felt safe within the snug confines, even as sauntering passers-by came oh so close to her window. She was learning to be a morning person, realizing Grant often beamed between sunrise and noon. The morning light seemed to infuse him with charismatic volts of current. When late summer sun retired for the night, so did he. Not that she minded mellow, but it was thrilling for her to be caught up in the morning charge. What if we could sip coffee, make love, and catch the buzz of this town, he asked. I want to be in the movies, said Marissa. Is that possible for me, for you? You know the story. It's all about being in the right place at the right time, said Grant. You forgot about the part where I fall for the sweetest, most alluring guy I ever met. He smiled and he said, you got me. We're a continent away from Moab, said Marissa. We're not that far away in spirit when you think about it. The main difference is the color of the trees and, well, the garnet rocks out there. Okay. And then finally, back to Moab. Marissa knew that she needed, and this is 2011 and it's May, a more specific sense of the terrain before her play would resonate with anyone on or off stage. Too familiar for its own good, she thought. She kept thinking about her sister. Marissa and Grant had left town literally overnight. Marissa had essentially run out on Diana, to whom she owed something more than a lame explanation. It had now been quite a while, and if they went back now, Marissa might be able to mend the wound. She knew it was her own doing. This is Harry and Carolyn in the Southwest, June 2011. Harry whistled, Lennon and McCartney's Come Together. Carolyn softly added, over me. They were deplaning in Vegas during the early evening hours, but what were they thinking? About their children? What this reunion would bring after all these years? About the rental car and how long till they reached Moab? From what they recalled, it would take more than 6 hours, but Harry moved along. Perhaps it would take them 5+. They could always stay on the strip overnight or go directly to the house. But if they chose a night at a motel, for whatever reason, they should tell Diana or Marissa. Harry and Carolyn had married just over 4 decades earlier. Long ago, they had come to understand each other's gestures and idiosyncrasies. Thus, when Carolyn stood and looked at the sky, Harry knew they would be driving across the desert. And just a little bit about our reflection. This is his first reflection. Was it really 1970 when I sweated my way through a few weeks on and off, taking census when my heart and body pined for Carolyn. And Cambridge is now a blur. And I think just one more, and then we can talk. So this is Harry and Carolyn together. They began the trek from Nevada to Utah. The enduring daylight enabled them to gaze at the topography and colors of the Southwest, the hues of browns and reds, and a sky filled with deepening blue and then some scarlet as well. Out of the city, the rocks were jagged and resolute. Each cluster pronounced isolation. Harry and Carolyn were determined to drive straight through. It was too late to even consider stopping at a canyon. They drove and drove, stopping only once at an all-night truck stop where they could get gas and use the restrooms before switching drivers and setting out once again. After 6 hours, they finally arrived on Main Street at Moab. A large, tall sign announcing Expedition Lodge beckoned. They had decided to just spend one night by themselves before meeting the daughters the next morning and then going to the house. It was well past midnight when Harry and Carolyn pulled in. The receptionist at the front desk, they later decided, was either on drugs or had slept all day in preparation for her shift. "What can I do for you?" she asked. "We'd like a room for just tonight." Okay, so bits and pieces of Harry jumping all over the place, as his novel does. It's something, pretty new for me as a novelist. And let's talk about it, or let's talk about whatever you want to talk about in terms of questions.
It appears to me that it's kind of like, I can identify it, and I think we all can because we're of that age, number one. Number two is that it's kind of like a day in the life every day for Harry and Carolyn. It seems to be that format, a day in the life. You got now, and then you go back, and you can see the development. What intrigued me was the questioning in the beginning. When he looked at his marriage, his life with her in one direction, she looked at it in a different way. He looked at it as it was kind of a nice, easy going, and she looked at it like, I'm here.
Well, interesting, intriguing observations. The book is entitled Harry, and it's not all about Harry.
No.
And so several months ago when I was kind of, wandering about and saying to myself, should I really call this book Harry? And I consulted with a close friend who had not read the book, but I said, it's not really about Harry. And he said, why don't you call it that? Not really about Harry. And I said, no, I can't do that. He said, but you just said it's not really about Harry. So I decided to call it Harry, and this much of it really is about Harry, the final component. It's about Harry and Carolyn, and it's about them in the beginning. They're 22 in 1970. Yeah, and they look it, and they act it. And then, yes, it kind of goes off and it comes back to them. So maybe they're the kind of main stabilizing forces in the book. The narrative always comes back to who they are, but there's a lot more to it. And that has to do with the, let's have more questions before I tip my hat a little bit. Or if there are more questions or comments.
So go ahead.
The front cover, I don't see how it relates to anything. It seems rather phallic to me, sorry. Looks like two legs.
Well, this is the arch in Moab. This is Arches National Park.
Is that real?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Real place.
And these are hikers. Could be Harry hiking in it. This is Harry as an older guy. This is Harry as a younger guy, right next to the older guy.
And I see puzzle pieces.
Yes, and the person whom who created the cover, asked me to describe the novel. And I said, well, it's kind of puzzling. And she decided to put in the puzzle piece. So there's really actually a lot. It's almost like this whole cover is a jigsaw puzzle. I think it's actually brilliant.
I think you have to read the book to get the cover.
Well, yeah, maybe, yeah, maybe you do. Although people who saw the cover before the book was even out said, well, at least you got a great cover. You know, I mean, just looking at the artwork. I think both simultaneously true. You have to read the book to get the cover, but the cover stands on its own as something that will catch people. I think, I think. So there's so much to the cover. There are puzzle pieces all around here because it is a little puzzling, and it does go back and forth. And, that's a little bit new for me, certainly given my last novel, which did not do that. In fact, all my novels didn't do that.
I think what might be interesting to me, should I read the book, is to identify, through the stages, how I and my wife and my daughter might fit into this. And, oh yeah, we've experienced this, or, and I think there's probably going to be a lot of that in there, a lot of commonality with the average person.
That's what you were trying to do. Because my question was going to be, what was your goal, in writing this book? But it does sort of sound like a chronicle for those of us of this generation.
Yeah, it seems like this was not a conscious choice, but I seem to be doing that with my books, and certainly with the reflections in the music, of that era, the 60s, 70s music kind of thing. It comes very natural to me to do that, and it seems to fit. Now, in terms of construction, here's what I knew what was going on. I basically was writing a novel about arches in Moab, and I was also writing a novel about the Lower East Side and Harry and Carolyn. And then I woke up one day, it was about a year and a half ago, and I said, these go together. These fit together. And how am I going to make these fit together? It was obvious to me that I had these two tracks, and the tracks intersected. So it was a pretty gargantuan job to figure out how to do that. And then just, a lot of you know that I'm also a theater person. And the other day, as I was going through my papers, I said, I wrote a first act of Harry and Carolyn, I scripted it, and I forgot that I did that. So again, so there's a third track. I guess for a little while I thought this might end up being a play. And then at a certain point I said, no, that's not a play. There's far too much, that would never work as a play. And I set to putting these things together. And that was fun, even though it was, pretty major challenge to me to do that. But I did that's what I did, is I put them together. So I created Marissa and Diana, the daughters, the now grown daughters, in 2011, when the novel is completed, the end point of the novel. They're grown.
Did you have them in the beginning too, the daughters, or no?
Not in the very beginning, no. But it's partially their stories as well. So it's many people's stories. And that is, after all, what I do, is I create stories, which took me a while to understand about myself, even though it should have been self-evident, given who I am.
It's the family, like.
It is a family.
Each of them.
Yeah.
You're getting inside their heads, and you get their perspective.
Absolutely.
You read about Marissa.
Yeah.
That was clearly like from her perspective. So, do you ever do Carolyn's?
Yeah.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I do. The younger, the two sisters. How much should I tell you about this? The two sisters are dissimilar. Let's put it.
Siblings are.
As many. Yeah.
Many sisters are.
Yeah, and I won't say anything more about that, but I will say that I'm depicting their stories and their relationship, and their relationship to their boyfriends as well. And then towards the last quarter to a third of the book, everything turns towards Harry. And it's not a spoiler to say this, since it's on the back cover and since all the advanced press on this says this. Harry becomes a guy who's struggling in his early 60s with memory issues. And you know, so that the book kind of, it takes a turn either right or left, or, and you know, it's all centered upon Harry at that point. Everything else that has happened. So, one last thing, Stefan, before you say anything. So for me, you know, there are all these threads, and it's fun. It's fun to do that, and it's developmental, and it's evolutionary for me to be able to try to do that, to take the threads instead of writing a book like my previous novel, which is about not only about one character, but it is her story. It's April's story. It's called Silverbird Summer. Some of you know about that. But that's far more about the young woman on this cover. And it's a far more decipherable cover, I know. Yes, what were you going to ask about?
Obviously, this is supposed to be fiction, but are there non-fiction parts in there that you kind of put in?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question. So here's where this all comes from. There is a nonfiction part. And the nonfiction part is, I did take census on the Lower East Side in 1970 with my then best friend.
Oh, you did? Personally?
I did.
All right.
And it was his idea to do this. None of this stuff happened with these people. Not anything at all. But it is true that I did that. And I have very distinct memories of that short period of my life.
Platform right there.
Yeah, so a platform is right. And that what people don't know is that, and I dedicated the book to my friend who was, you know, I had to figure this out, who died tragically several months later. And you know how it is when stuff happens 50 plus years ago. You have to figure out what year was that, and where does, again, puzzle pieces, which one fits in here. But it's, you know, what I was thinking about even several days ago, and I'm not sure about this, and nobody will ever be able to tell us this, it could be that the last time I saw him was taking census, the census. And then he died in a tragic automobile accident into the summer. And of course I've thought, you know, he was my best friend and closest friend. I've thought about him on and off ever since. You know how those things are. It's not like a daily occurrence, but you know, when you're that close to somebody, you just think about them. So I did think about him a lot when I was writing the book, and I let his sister and brother know that I was dedicating this book to Ron, and they really didn't respond. You know, not even like, oh, or maybe I'll get the book, or I just wanted them to know. So that part is nonfiction. I, Fred Sokol, and Ron Berenson were taking the census in the Lower East Side in the summer of 1970, or maybe at the very beginning of, maybe it was even May or June. Anyway, right in that period, I did do that, and I have really clear memories of how that went, which are not in the book. Very good question. Thanks for asking it.
Good. You mentioned in the very beginning Bob Dylan. Are you a fan of Bob Dylan?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't everybody?
Yeah, mostly earlier than right now, but than exactly right now. But yes. Yeah.
Can I tell you a little story about Bob Dylan?
Go for it, yeah.
We went to the Newport Folk Festival, and he was going electronic, and we booed him because we didn't want him to go from...
You went to that actually.
And he said, there's a storm coming. Yell at the storm, not at me. So we all yelled at the storm. The storm never showed up, disappeared. At the very end, we congratulated him for being a wonderful musician.
It's a good story.
So, sounds intriguing. Sounds interesting.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah.
So, a lot of preparation.
Yeah, it took a long time.
So what are you doing now?
What am I doing now is I've always been this guy who is a been a multitasker before we even had that phrase. Always. And certain individuals, namely my older son, has mentioned that if I just stick to one thing, I'd probably be a genius. If I could just keep it on, but that's not who I am. So I have 2 projects going, and they both relate to basketball. Another something it's another passion of mine. It always has been, both playing and coaching and watching. And you know, if you see some crazy guy with a backwards basketball cap on and on the wild streets of Long Meadow bouncing a basketball still or going to a playground, it's me. And probably the only one in his age group who's outside doing that stuff. There might be a few people in gyms. So anyway, so both of these projects relate to basketball, and they both have really, I think, engaging backgrounds. One is this, that I wrote a novel I don't even know how I did this, in the late 1970s or around 1980, that was basketball oriented, and it was essentially about a kind of hardline basketball coach in the eastern part of the state. I was a basketball coach at a high school. I was a freshman JV coach at a high school in Sudbury, Massachusetts. And the guy who ran that program was, he was pretty tyrannical. We later became pretty good friends, but he was pretty tyrannical. And so it was loosely, very, very loosely when I wrote this, based a little bit about him. But again, that was it. Then it kind of took off in its own direction. And it went on and on and on. So I only had a hard copy of this because I wrote it before I was writing on a computer. And I figured, I found it really, again, about a year ago. And I thought, I'm going to read a little bit of this and then I can just put it away. And I started reading it and I thought, this is really good. Now what do I do? Not good right now, but good potentially. Some of the writing, I'm embarrassed by. I was not a particularly great fiction writer, but some of it is, the phrasing and some of the dialogue, I've always been a good dialogue writer, is very true. And so I set about the process of rewriting the novel. It's political, and I did not remember that. I was saying things about various stances and postures in politics. I was also writing about him, and I was writing about this guy's time coaching women's basketball, girls basketball, which the person I mentioned to you did not do. So that's why I say it's fictional. So that's one project, and it's in 3 piles in front of my computer. One that I've by hand kind of penciled in all kinds of changes, and now I'm entering them. And so then that gets shifted to that pile. Then the middle pile I'm working from, and then there's a pile towards the very end that I haven't even looked at. So that'll take me, a year or 2 to probably do that one. And then there's a nonfiction book that I began about 12, 13 years ago. I was playing full court basketball on a weekly basis with a man named Devron McCummings, who's an African-American guy and very charismatic and a wonderful basketball player. And I got to know him. And it turns out that his story is one of a playground star as a youth, mostly in Springfield, although he ventured away and then kind of came back. But he also became a crack cocaine addict. And now he's flipped his life so that he works with at-risk kids, he runs a gym, and he's kind of like a beautiful character. And he and I became close. So about a dozen years ago, I started writing his story, which, as it turns out, is partially my story. I had somebody read that first installment, that really half the book at least, who read it and he said, this is really a duet. And it's really well done. You have to finish this book. So PBS kind of came along 6 years ago and did one of their connecting points about Devron and myself. And when I arrived at the station and they saw what I was saying and what Devron was saying, and as I said, he's very photogenic, they said, okay, where's the film? I said, I'm not a filmmaker. And they said, well, you got to do the film. So I couldn't get anybody to just do the film. then I thought I found somebody, and we did a little shooting, and those people kind of went away, and the pandemic came, and it really went away, the film aspect. But there's no reason why I shouldn't finish that book. I mean, after all, both Devon and I are vertical, you know, at this point, more or less. And,
Say that way.
you know, and we're staying that way. So I keep telling him that we're going to finish the book, and he's going, yeah, okay, brother, whenever you want. And I know he's kind of saying, like, yeah, you're not going to really do that, but I am going to do that. So right now, as it gets warmer, I'm going to make a choice whether to go right at him and say, okay, we're going to do this, put aside the novel I'm working on, which is a pretty massive project, and just complete the nonfiction, because it should be completed. It's too interesting about his life and times, choices he made, choices he regrets, all kinds of things like that. So yeah, you know, and I look forward to doing that. I hope, and I really want to do that. You can tell that I want to do that. It's just time. I've made enough excuses, you know, during, as I said, during the heavy COVID era. It was like, I don't want to get close. You know, everything in the book, you know, we can't do this. The filmmakers went away. So I want to get to him. 2 big projects. Yeah.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, it keeps me off the streets, you know.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing.
Do you set aside time to write every day, or do you just write whenever it strikes?
I'm one of the people who writes whenever it strikes, but I do write every day. It used to be that I was a morning writer. Now I'm not. It could be that because I'm such an exercise maven and that I'm practicing 2 instruments, I don't get to the writing later. But I do some writing every day. That can be revision, that can be creating. So, and if I don't, I feel kind of like, you know, why didn't I do that? We have a, you know, prolific writer right here who writes for long periods of time, far more longer time blocks than I. And, you know, of course, I continue to be a theater critic. And so during the on season, I'm running around all over the New England covering plays. You know, it's funny how people know me, you know, as the individual who wears different hats. A guy in this very facility who was going to do some podcasting with me, and we're going to do that again. And I said to him, do you know me? And he goes, yeah, you were the guy who wrote for the Republican. Yeah, I did. You know, that was like, that stopped in 2006. Let's put it that way. I did for a long period of time. And now I write for a website called Talkin' Broadway, and some people read that and base their choices of theater somewhat upon what I write. So I'm really actively writing a lot, it seems to me. And I guess I'm okay with the fact that maybe I'm this positive Renaissance guy instead of the guy who wrote, you know, like the great American novel. But, you know, fiction writing is something that it's really opened up to me. You know, it's something that I think several people were encouraging me, and I just put it on a rear burner because I was too busy with family, and I was too busy with 2 careers at once. I just didn't have the headspace to do it. I couldn't do it. And now I do. So.
You're on the 2nd page of the Springfield Sunday Republican.
Yeah, and I don't even, save it for me, okay? That's what I hear. Somebody called me last night and said, you're on the 2nd.
Your photo and everything.
I didn't even, how did they do that? I mean.
You're so handsome, that's why.
No, I think there's.
Did maybe Joan did from Odyssey?
Yeah.
That's how it was written.
It was from the Odyssey?
About the Odyssey.
Oh, it was from the Odyssey, and it must have been pitched there.
It was all about you.
Yeah.
Because, and there's a comical side to this, because, you know, a couple of months ago, somebody pitched a story on me to the Republican, and they said, he's too prolific. You know, we did a story on this last, you know, like, because, you know, and so I figured, like, well, okay, that's fair, you know, and so I was very surprised to hear that. But yeah, the Odyssey appearance, which is later this week, I know they want a few people to attend. So I guess they're trying to do some marketing, and I am too. Dan, you have questions? No.
I don't have questions, but I will say I loved hearing the soundtrack of my youth through your reading, because that just, its music is very emotional, and it was kind of fun to hear that at different stages and to do that comparison. So I was interested in that, and unfortunately now I'm really going to have to read this because I want to know how all those threads come together and what the hell happens to Harry.
There's a lot, and there's a lot of music in it.
Just, it was intriguing, and that's a good thing. I'm wondering about the book you wrote in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Is it based in the 70s? Is it how will it end up? Will it be current? Will it be 70s? Do you know?
I don't know. It's not going to fly forward. I know that much. I don't know exactly how it's going to end, but it's going to be a timepiece. It's going to be a period piece, and that's I think why it really has value. She and I have talked about historical fiction as a historical fiction writer here, and yeah, I think it really is. It's in this time capsule, which I actually like. Now there are certain people who are going to say, who have said to me like, nobody's going to want to read that.
They've talked to them all, right?
Well, I mean, you know, there are certain people, and there's, you know, this could be commercial people in the book biz saying like, I can't sell this, nobody can read it, nobody will want to read it. That's different, you know, and my own story going backward, I started writing these novels 12 or 13 years ago when another friend read part of my first novel and said, you know, this is really great, and I know an agent in the city who's going to want this. And he actually went on and said, and I want some of the film rights. And people have said that about all my work. It's very visual. You know, these should be films. And I again go like, yeah, I think I agree. And the little anecdote about that is when I finally found a screenwriter who said, yeah, I'll write this. It'll cost you $37,000, no guarantees. And I said, well, no, I'm not going to do that. Because people have been saying, you know, come on. I had a big, you know, my plays and my novels, you know, you've got to turn these into.
As a sponsor.
I do, but I don't have that.
Tap into film schools. I mean, there's so many universities now with film schools where it could be creative projects for students.
I know, that could be too. And when my first two novels are about elderly Jews running all over the place, and an independent filmmaker friend of mine said, listen, you need to write the screenplay and you need to send it directly to Dustin Hoffman. Because he's an older guy now, and his film production company wants this. And I said, yeah, but I can't write the screenplay. And he tried to tell me I can learn how to write the screenplay, and I just never did it. You know, but he even said this is where you send it, and you get a lawyer to endorse it, and all this stuff. And it's sort of like I break down when it gets to those.
Oh, it becomes too much like work.
Well, yeah, it's how many new skills can I learn? You know, I mean.
And your day is already full.
And that's right. That's the other problem. The other problem. I'm trying to be a good marketer, and I'm a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10. I would say I'm better. I mean, I used to be a 1.5. Like, who cares? Now I care. So I'm over the halfway point. But I don't know how to write a screenplay, and he can tell me it's really simple to write the screenplay. But where were we? What were we talking about before I went off in this tangent?
I don't know. I like the tangent. It's fun.
Historical fiction, I think, is when you started to view it.
Yeah. So.
And the 70s now are anything that's 50 years or more is now considered historical.
Yeah. I mean,
These people in retirement homes.
it's certainly
Besides watching
historical.
television.
certainly historical. Yeah, so I was saying that I was basically saying it keeps me out of trouble to do these kinds of things. And, you know, politically, I was, you know, some of the stuff that I said in the novel I'm rewriting now, it's pretty strong, you know, very strong. I mean,
My question is, you know, your book would be very appealing to people of our age. How appealing would it be to younger people who really couldn't identify or understand what we lived through?
well, they couldn't get that part. They could certainly get the part about the sisters. They might get that part. I shouldn't say they won't, but they're more likely to gravitate to the part about the sisters who were depicted as early as what they were like in high school, and then moving forward. And they're not all that old, so they could relate to that. I'm not sure if they'd relate to 1970 when the book begins. They might. There are many things for many people in this particular novel, I think. I know what I was saying. I was saying something about when I was writing about the old Jews. Oh yeah, but we covered that about, yeah. What was I going to say? I'm not sure. But so it's a later in life project for me, you know, kind of pushed by people at different marking points in my life, like, hey, wait a second, you're writing incredible dialogue. What are you doing? You know, drop everything and write it. And I go, I can't drop everything, you know. And then there was another point, I haven't talked too much about this, that, you know, I'm musical, and I was writing this dialogue, and somebody said, you need to go to Yale right away and become a lyricist. Get with Maury Yeston, who is a Broadway guy, and teaching at Yale, and he'll work on you. You can do this. And I said, good idea, you know, but I can't do that one either, you know. So it's like people have bucket lists, and I have listings of things I'm trying to get to instead of the places, I guess. It's good. It's you know, very rigorous intellectually and creatively to be able to do this kind of thing. Thank you.